Why, hello there. It's me, Jeremy, your favorite bald dude telling you about Standard and Strange, a store and a brand with simple rules. Sell clothes they themselves would wear, manufacture it ethically, and build it to last. From boots made in Oregon to loop wheel garments made in Japan, find all the best clothes for your wardrobe at Standard and Strange. StandardandStrange.com. Hey folks, it's Blammo. I'm Jeremy Kirkland, and I'm here. We're here, you're here, we're all here. We're doing the podcast. I sit before you enjoying the end of summer. Thank God. I mean, geez, I'm just not a summer guy. I'm a fall guy. I like the apples. I like the pumpkins. I like the layers. I like the leaves. You know, I'm very anxious to start to get those overcoats on and getting my layers going. What's been happening this week? My daughter started kindergarten. Wow. They're growing up, man. Days are long, but the years are short. Whatever. I dropped her off, and every day I walked away, dude, I was mad emotional. I was crying. I was a bit teary-eyed just dropping my little girl off at kindergarten, and I couldn't, you can't go in the school because they keep the school on lockdown, like any school these days, guns and stuff, which is whatever. We're not going to get into that. But it was hard to watch her go away. But man, every day she just was like, see you, Dad. I was like, dang, it was heavy. And I was trying to find ways to just kind of chill out a bit because it's like kind of tugs on the old heartstrings. And you're like, man, I need to veg. And lately, man, I've just been going nuts on old cartoons. Actually, that's a lie. They're not old cartoons. They're just cartoons in general. I wasn't watching Looney Tunes, but I was definitely watching, I started rewatching Boondocks. Just so much great cartoons and it was great. I felt good. It was like I was back to normal, back to the slapstick reality of incredible television, which kind of brings me to my guest this week. Big old pod this week, just a massive guest and one that was an absolute honor to record with. Mr. Nick Weidenfeld. So if you're a Time Crisis guy, if you're a Ezra Koenig dude, if you're a Neo Yokio person, if you're any person who's watched anything on Adult Swim or Desus and Mero, somehow this gentleman's come into your orbit. Nick Weidenfeld, he's a writer, he's a TV producer and television executive. He's helped develop and produce many of all of our favorite shows, from Rick and Morty and Robot Chicken to Boondocks and Children's Hospital. Desus and Mero, Neo Yokio, 10-Year-Old Tom, which is it's currently on HBO in their second season. I mean, there's just a insane multitude of entertainment that this guy has been involved or somewhere near. And we chatted. It's crazy. We actually chatted for like 3.5 hours. I mean, it was just a banger of a pod. And so obviously we edited it quite a bit because, I was probably riffing and sounding like a goofball, which I am doing right now. But Nick and we discuss his life and career, working at Adult Swim, imposter syndrome, lots of good discussions on that, giving good feedback and good notes, his love of Faulkner, the appeal of animation, the greatest cartoons of all time, getting fits off, design with constraints, and what show is the closest to his personal sense of humor. It's Blammo, Nick Weidenfeld. We're doing it. Let's go. So I will say from the very beginning, I've had many people on this show, and usually at the end of a pod, I'm like, hey, thanks so much for doing this. If there's someone you recommend that I chat with or a fan that you would always want to have on, please let me know. And this is it's always, this is on the record, but that question I always ask people is off the record. And you're the number one person. Since I'm pulling up my Apple Notes, 2018, people are like, yo, do you know Nick Weidenfeld? You should talk with Nick Weidenfeld. Swear to God.
Now that I'm not flattered, but who? I just can't even imagine I can't imagine that I'm on anybody's record other than, what I mean? Store, I would have thought maybe who could possibly, I'm so schooled by that, but I do feel like I've done whatever I've done.
Well, because you're mysterious, but you're the person that's the source. And this is because when I told my wife, she's a big comedy junkie, she's the one who I will credit turned me on to all of the like, I don't know how to categorize this sort of comedy. So excuse me for sounding ignorant, but like the kind of like totally like off the wall slapstick, like bizarre, like Tim and Eric style, absolutely stuff. She was very into it, and where I was like, I don't understand. Like I get Monty Python, but I don't get this sort of stuff. And so all Adult Swim, which was basically at that era, especially in our relationship, was all you. I mean, I want to be clear. Obviously, there was a team, there was other people, but like,
I was certainly present for that era.
Yeah, all of these shows. I mean, while we're talking, you have a Moonanite.
Oh yeah. Well, you know what that is. Do you even know what that is? This is history. This is legit history. This movie.
Okay, flex. Let's hear it.
Well, so this is the like. Do you know about the Boston City bombing?
Oh my God! Yeah, I do remember this.
In like, I think it's 2006. I believe it was when we were making the Aqua Teen Hunger Force movie.
Yes,
there was a promotional campaign where we had these light brights. They're light bright. So the light right behind me is of a Moonanite, which is a character from Aqua Teen Hunger Force, which is a little pixelated, alien that comes down and that, throws the middle finger, right? And so Ignignok and is their name. And so they made these like magnet tiles that were, just like juiced up light brights. And if you attach them to metal things, they would light up. And so they put a street team to go put them all over the city. But in Boston, there was one that was put, and so these were in a couple places, but it took the sort of, it took a Bostonian mind to go, to call that was attached to a bridge. And someone called and said, there's a bomb on the bridge. And the bomb is just this pixelated light bright of this guy giving, the middle finger.
Yeah.
This little cute character. And they shut down the city of Boston. They shut it down. Helicopters, they shut it down. There's no one's going outside. We found 3 more of these bombs all over the city. People were free. I mean, basically, the city of Boston sued Cartoon Network and Adult Swim for $1 million or whatever, like the damages, which I think it was something like $1 million. People got fired.
Oh no!
It was not funny. I mean, to us, it was very funny, but it was not funny. And like the top brass were like, "This is insane. This is out of control. Who okayed this?" And you're like, it's just this is like also in street teams are probably, this is just a clever street team. This is the bomb. This is one of the bombs. So it's attached. So that Moon Knight, that's like, but this thing is of what I think, and what was so hard to tell anybody was like, guys, I think we might have the best. This is a dumb movie that no one is going to ever see. Like we made, and I think we released it in like so many theaters. It was so crazy. Like this was like Adult Swim probably at its greatest and most like out of the box, like let's go do just wild shit. Let's make this cheap movie and let's put it in like 30,000 theaters and like, let's like treat it like a real movie. And then this comes out and people are like, they already didn't really respect us within the company. And they were like, take your toys and go back home. People were pissed. And for me, I was like, I think we might have just had the best marketing campaign maybe in the history of television. But if you go up and you will look up, do like Aqua Teen Hunger Force Boston bombing, dude, that's the thing. I mean, yeah,
wow.
You can see it. Yeah,
that's better than the Academy Award, than the Emmy, than any of that stuff.
I mean, so much better. You kidding? That's all that matters. I can't believe I got one of these things.
Yeah, they give Emmys to fucking meteorologists. All right, let's
let's get real.
Yeah, that's crazy. But I mean all of that like animation stuff. I think especially now, where as I'm older, I'm like overwhelmed by the amount of content, and so if I could, I've just been revisiting old animation stuff, and then also like a lot of the newer things that are coming out that I think are even better. To where, and I don't know if it's easier on production. I mean, we can talk about that stuff later, but it's gold. I mean, Robot Chicken, Boondocks, Rick and Morty. I mean, Rick and Morty, I think, was one of the first, for many people, TV shows that like entered the lexicon of people that didn't watch animated stuff. Like the people that were watching Rick and Morty, the last animated stuff they watched was like Animaniacs when they were 10, and the jokes went over their head.
Having been involved in that and developed that, that definitely has kind of changed the course of my life, even just through its affiliation of making the, developing and making the pilot. I think that people do, where I think people before, no matter what I would say, if I'm like, I mainly make cartoons or whatever. It's like, I like, I say I make comedy. I've made a bunch of comedy. I made other things. I made game shows. I've done a bunch of other shit, made news programming. Something about most of my career is I've made cartoons, and most people would be like, oh, that's cool. But like once Rick and Morty happened, they like understood that in a way that I think that, The Simpsons is real. Like that's like going to be on, even something about Rick and Morty for a certain like if I say they're like, oh, I get what you do now. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah. I mean, it's also a level of production that I think is like this purposeful, I don't know, like perfection. I'm serious. I fucking love that show. When the writing got even crazier, when it turned into some, because I think the way people thought, and we're going to talk about your backstory in a second, but the way people thought about animation as single serving things that was like a very brief stimulation of their mind, entertainment to watch while you ate a bowl of cereal. Rick and Morty, I mean, obviously like anime as an aside was doing that, but on the American side, stuff like Boondocks, but more importantly, Rick and Morty, that made a thing where it's like, no, this is now an event. This is not bring your bowl of cereal and watch it in the morning. This is like primetime television. We're competing with other shows that are 100x in the budget. Yeah. And it's incredible writing.
Yeah. And look, like to be clear, basically I developed it. We can talk about that. Made the pilot, worked through, with Justin and Dan, Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon throughout the writing of that pilot to get them made. And then I left. And so it's sort of when like so much of what they did, I have no part of, sort of birthed it and then they sort of ran with it. But I think to your point, there's something about the production value for sure, but there's something about the density and sort of bespokeness of each episode at that kind of quality that I think feels like a very dense live action show that just animation, even The Simpsons doesn't have. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And look, I was talking to another friend early on when I think maybe I showed him the pilot, and I think we can keep this, but I was showing my friend who makes a lot and has been very successful in animation, who's maybe one of the smartest people I know. And he read this, he was like, damn, this shit is sick. This is great, but they cannot make many of these. And I was like, what do you mean? And I was like really like so proud of it. And I was like, what do you think of this? And he goes, this is not meant to, this is too dense. It's too bespoke. It's too high concept. The episode. It's just too much. Like
the audience isn't smart enough.
The audience is smart enough. The creative team behind it cannot make hundreds of episodes. And I look back at this and you go, wow, there's been a bunch of seasons, but man, do they take them forever to make those episodes. And it was like the opposite of something like a South Park or even a Simpsons, where you can just churn it out. Like there's a certain amount, and especially in those, second and third season, I think it's really clear too, but you're like, it's just, they feel very belabored, and that's what makes them awesome. But it is not what most animation was ever meant to do. Animation is supposed to get to 100 episodes it's supposed to get to 100 episodes like most sitcoms as fast as possible. And you look at this and you go, damn, what are they on? 50 episodes now? 40, 50 episodes, 5 seasons in?
Yeah.
It's been 10 years, bro. This is a long time. And I just remember him telling me this, being like, this is great, but they can't do what something like a South Park or Matt and Trey do. It just can't do what it doesn't have the formula that like a Family Guy has, where it's like, hey, Jeremy, remember when we did that? And then you just got a team that's writing that thing that they did. Remember we did that podcast? There's a joke about the podcast. Each episode is so, it's maybe feels more like television now, even than then. But there's a density and a uniqueness to each episode that I think, I don't know. It was funny when I was like, not that not a knock, but it was like, these guys can't make a ton of these things.
Wow.
And keep up the quality. And it sort of has shown, it's just, they don't have that many,
Yeah. Damn.
It's interesting.
Well, let's jump back because
sure.
You have said on many occasions in the very few interviews that are out there about you, but like the string that runs through it all is that you speak about that like how you got into the business wasn't really deserved, which I want to pick at, but you talk about how you broke into the business through friends.
The story is I definitely did not want to be in TV. I like had no interest. I was a writer. I was a journalist. Specifically, I was a magazine editor. And it was
That's
like
Fader, right?
Well, I know I wrote a story for the Fader. I had a magazine that was like adjacent to early like Vice. It was called While You Were Sleeping, and it was a graffiti magazine.
Oh, that's right.
So basically, I got to college and I wanted to be a journalist and a writer. Like I'd been writing, I was like, oh, this is something I really want to do. And
why? Because Faulkner is like too difficult to understand.
Yeah, well, Faulkner like sort of came like I was into English. I was like, maybe I want to go into academia. But I was very interested in music. I was interested in music journalism, and I was interested in like comedy writing. I just liked writing. And I got an internship in sophomore year of college or end of freshman year of college. And I was living in New York City and at a place called pseudo.com, which was like the earliest internet radio. This is 1999. Like,
okay,
you know,
so it's basically you and KEXP in terms of internet radio at the time.
Yeah. And this they made a documentary about the guy who created pseudo.com called We Live in Public. Like the guy's a total, the guy that created this, like the first internet TV, really, like the first live and internet radio, but with live streaming. Absolutely brilliant documentary. Guy's out of his mind. You should watch We Live in Public. They had the DKNY building on Houston. You remember what, or it used to be the DKNY. I think something else is there now. It's on the corner of Houston. They had all the floors of this six floor building. And each one of the floors was an internet radio station that would do something sort of different. You know, there was like a coffee house folk station. There was a, techno, like jungle music station. And the top floor was 88 Hip Hop, which was a hip hop radio station. And I got a job as an intern at 88 Hip Hop. And I was like, that's what I did for the summer. I worked for a brilliant editor, young dude named G. Kim, who also had his own hip hop magazine, and he was running this internet radio. And I was running around my job was they would have parties. They would film DJ sets. They would basically film DJ sets, put them out online, audio and video, but no one had like high enough Wi-Fi or buffering to like actually watch the video. And I would get
real player.
Yeah. And my job was to get basically release forms. Like Nas would show up and I have to figure out how do I get Nas to give me his release form, like to sign his release form. That was my job. And I do it like on, a couple days a week. And then he was like, do you want to, you seem like you're really interested. Do you want to write here? And I was like, yeah, I would love to write here. So I wrote their hip hop news. I would write copy for their hip hop news that would come out, I think probably, a couple days a week. And while I was there, they had video cameras and I would take the video cameras and I would go to shows saying I was a journalist, no video camera. And I would get backstage to show. I'd just get into free shows like the Wetlands, like Hieroglyphics are performing at the Wetlands. I would get in for free. And because I would say, oh, I'm a journalist with 88 Hip Hop. Then I meet a guy named Chris Naracco, who is like a legend. He was the editor of Big Brother magazine, which was skate magazine, and Strength magazine. And he's like, and I know this story is getting long, but I just do think you'll appreciate this from all the skate shit. I meet this dude backstage and he goes, do you have access? He's like, what do you do? I was like, oh, I'm a journalist for 88 Hip Hop. He goes, do you have access to a video camera? And I was like, sure. So I go and I'm like, yes. He goes, I do the craziest fucking interviews you've ever seen. Like someone's got to record these because they just don't work just in print. And he takes me to a Fat Joe interview and I steal a video camera and it is the craziest interview I've ever seen. Like he's just like, he almost gets his ass kicked. And then everything Fat Joe has said, he then takes me to the back and says he's going to kick my ass if I don't erase everything that was just said on this thing. Like it was really nuts. And it was like very dangerous. And then the guy goes, all right, you passed. And he started giving me writing work. And he's like, you can write for Big Brother. You can write for Strength, which is another, skater magazine. Yeah. And then he ultimately hooks me up with this dude that has started this graffiti magazine. And I start writing for them. And I realize like the copy is pretty terrible. And I go, what if I'm your editor? Because someone needs to edit this magazine. And so now I'm a sophomore in college and, I'm like sneaking into Cool Keith's bus to like try to interview him and like things like that. And so it's like, that's how my career basically, like, I guess is more of the hustle is what we talked about. It's like, I'm just doing whatever I can to get into the bus or backstage to then try to write some kind of piece. And ultimately this guy goes, hey, look, I got to shutter this magazine. Like, I'm just spending all my money on this thing. I was like, well, what if I can find a money for it? What if I can get someone to like VC some kind of investment? And somehow I find some crazy dude who's like wants to be Larry Flint. And, you know, he's like, yeah, as long as you put like girls in the magazine, like, honestly, as long as I can see like naked girls, I was like, I can't promise that, but I will try. And then he's like, you can go. And then obviously it's nothing like what our magazine is. It's like a comedy graffiti magazine. And so I find the money and the guy makes me his partner. And that's like how I became a magazine editor. And then we had a really good run of a few years. Vice was getting really popular. We, were making a little bit of money. As things go, me and my partner sort of had a falling out and it stopped being fun. And I was like, I got to do something else. Like, this was really good. But like, if I'm not doing this with my partner and there's a bunch of other shit going on in my life.
How old are you at this time? Is this like the quarter life crisis stuff?
I'm 22. I'm 23.
Okay, so you're getting there.
22, 23. And then I'm like, I got to do something, but I don't know what I'm going to do. And I go to my brother who is in college and he's a senior in college. I was like, I'm just going to crash at his like dorm for like a couple weeks, like the house he's living in.
Do you even loop wheel, bro? Do you know what loop wheel garments are? I actually didn't, honestly. I was just like, oh, it's a flex. It's a special kind of cotton. Yeah, kind of. But the folks at Standard and Strange dropped a ton of knowledge bombs and their own incredible loop wheel tee. Made in Japan, of course. But back to loop wheel. It's an antique circular knitting machine that relies on gravity and uses spring bearded needles. Do you get it? Bearded needles? What the heck? Look, all you need to know is it's dope. It's better, and if you want to learn more, visit standardandstrange.com/loopwheel and check out their new loop wheel tees. Trust me, your boy is partial to yellow because, duh, but the tees are fire no matter what color you pick. The fit is spot on, and it's a classic tee that looks like it's from every era ever and fits like a dream. And it's from the folks from Standard and Strange, the shop that helps you own fewer, better things. Run by industry vets who are focused on incredible product from incredible vendors. And look, if that's not your vibe, check out some of their huge offerings of other Japanese denim or boots. But listen, the shirts, fam, the shirts, the loop wheel. So visit standardandstrange.com/loop wheel to learn more. Standard and Strange. Own fewer, better things at standardandstrange.com.
I'm sitting in my brother's place and all of his friends are watching stuff on Adult Swim. And no one knows what Adult Swim is. It's like, it's just late night Cartoon Network. They're all watching Aqua Teen Hunger Force. I was sort of familiar with it, but like, I'm talking about like everybody's watching it every night that I'm at like staying with my brother. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, damn, this thing seems really popular. So I start like doing a little bit of like, not research, but I was just really taken with like how much everyone seemed to love this very, like, as you said, very weird shit. Like this is not like other comedy that's on. Like it's very Dada. It's very like hard to follow. And everyone's like getting stoned and really loving this. And I like look it up online. I'm like, damn, I'm looking this up and like this is getting higher numbers, like viewership numbers than Jimmy Kimmel. Like this is,
oh wow.
Yeah. I mean, Jimmy Kimmel then, like he had just, but it's like network television, late night. Aqua Teen Hunger Force is getting better numbers. That's insane. So I'm like, I want to write a story about this network. And so I pitch it all around and I finally get someone to bite on it. Cause I'm like, I got to write, I got to do something. I can't live with my brother in a dorm room. He's about to graduate. I'm an adult. Like what the fuck is going on? So I basically go to Atlanta to do a story on Adult Swim for Esquire that for me is really about why do men specifically, because it was really over indexing like men, it was like 18 to 34-year-old men watching this. That's who advertisers want. And I was like, why are men watching this when there's nothing gendered about it? It's not like The Man Show, which it was a few years earlier. Like I was like, it was more just like, why do also like men really love Monty Python? And it doesn't seem like, my girlfriends really want to talk to me about Monty Python. You know what I mean? It's like, It's sort of empirical stuff, but you're like, it definitely felt like, at least the way advertisers were talking about it, and the way the numbers broke down, like this feels really gendered. So I go to Atlanta, and no one has ever gone and done an article about Adult Swim. Like, no one knows who they are.
I would have figured there would have been like a Rolling Stone thing.
There was not a single thing. Like, they are really under the radar. And I'm the first person to show up, and I spend like 4 days doing like an embedded story where I spend 4 days like looking at this weird stepchild of Cartoon Network. And I spend most of my time talking to this guy, Mike Lazo, who created Adult Swim. He found it, he made Space. His story is unbelievable. Like, it's like true, like fucking the Cheetos guy, the flaming hot Cheetos guy that everyone says is not real. This is the real version. This guy starts in the mailroom and then creates Adult Swim. So I'm talking to him over 4 days. He's very weird and misanthropic, and he doesn't like a lot of people. He doesn't like to travel. And he hears that someone that he really likes, it's maybe because there's only like 8 people that work at Adult Swim. It's very small. Like, no one's there. It's not even a network yet. It's just like an hour and a half or whatever, 2 hours a night. That their creative director, like a brilliant artist designer guy named Jacob Escobedo, who ended up doing like all of like, not just the Shin stuff, but he does like a lot of artwork you'd recognize for a lot of like bands that you'd know. He goes, "Oh, I love it. While You Were Sleeping, this magazine that I made." No, I didn't think anybody knew this magazine.
Oh shit!
Like, I knew we were like okay in like.
How'd you feel when that happened?
Sort of you telling me anybody would ask me to fucking be on your podcast. I mean, I was like shocked.
Get the fuck.
No, I swear to God, I was shocked. Because this guy, Mike Lazo, comes up to me and he goes, "Hey, Jacob Escobedo and this guy, Chip Duffy, who's also is a great, these
names sound like comic book characters."
No, they're so funny. That's why I say, this is the first time I've ever really told this story. It's like, these guys are like 2 guys that are like, "Oh, we know this guy's magazine and we like it." And this guy, Mike Lazo, comes up to me and says, "These 2 guys who work at Cartoon Network and Adult Swim say they know your magazine. I don't know it, but I trust them and I like them. Do you want to let's go to lunch?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'm interviewing him."
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I'm like, "Okay." And we go to lunch and we mainly talk. It comes up that he collects Faulkner first editions. This guy didn't graduate high school. He started in the mailroom at Cartoon Network. He collects Faulkner first editions, and and at college I was a Faulkner scholar. So it's like, I know all of Faulkner.
Are you fucking kidding me?
No. So he's like, "No, this is like, I know all of Faulkner," and we're talking. And he's like, "Oh, he can't believe it." So we really bond over this thing, right? We're like, and that I feel like is so weird. And then at the end of this lunch, he's like, because I was supposed to have left. He said, "Stay an extra day." And I was like, "Okay." So I stay an extra day. And he's like, "What are you doing after this?" And I was like, "I'm going home. Gotta go. I'm going to go back and live with my parents in DC. And he's like, "And I'm going to write this story." And he goes, "And then what?" And then I was like, "I'm going to, hopefully people read it and I'll do another story. Yeah. And then maybe I'll become an editor again of some kind of magazine." And he was like, "Well, would you want to come work here?" And I was like, "No, absolutely not. What do you mean?" And he was like,
"You seriously said no at first?"
"Yeah, absolutely." I said no. I was like, I'm going to move to Atlanta. I was like,
"Yeah." And this is pre all the Atlanta.
There's nothing. I was like
spot.
I was very into like Southern hip hop. Like, I was very into David Banner. I was very into
wow,
really? Bone Crusher. But I was like, absolutely not gonna move to Atlanta. And then he called me basically for the next month, like every couple of days or once a week. And he's like, I talked to HR. And you're gonna be the head of development. And I was like,
huge role. That is
but
a fucking job title in LA.
But I don't even know what that is. Like, at the time, I have no idea what that is. And I was like, no, thank you. Like, I can't move there. And he just really didn't wear me down, but he was like, just come on. Let's do it. And I was like, this is okay. And I was like, I got to get out of my parents' house. And then I talked to the Esquire editor and he goes, "Well, you can't publish the story because it's a huge conflict of interest if they're offering you a job COI, and you're doing this." And he goes, and I was like, damn. And I was like, but I don't even know if I want to do this. And he was like, well, do it for a year. And then maybe you got like a really big story. Maybe you got a book, of going down and working at this weird pirate ship of a place. And I was like, ooh, that's great. I'll do this for a year. It'll be so interesting. I'll go to the Atlanta.
I'm going to trick this guy, but my secret motive is to write a book.
And I show up.
Because that's where you make money.
That's where you make money. I was like, by the way, it's like the idea that I was still going to be in like print publishing. It was like, it's so psychotic that could have been my life. Like, it is really wild. Like the struggle of that. Like, but I was. is insane. I mean, this is no, walk in the park, but it is like, God damn, that would have been awful. So I go there for a year. Well, I go there, and literally he has this is how basically I show up. And to be honest, I don't know what being head of development is. I don't know what that means. Just side note. Do you know what an upfront is?
Absolutely.
So an upfront, in case your audience doesn't.
Yeah, explain it to the audience.
Well,
which is great.
It's like it's becoming less and less like relevant now. Like almost no one has, and they basically canceled it. But when there was linear TV and it was all ad supported, you needed big advertisers to pay, to keep your shows on the air. You need to make all your money up front. You need to have it. You need to know part of your nut is covered to make your TV show. Or to run your network. So you have these big events at the beginning of like the buying year, and you make it as sexy as possible. And you say, I have all these, here's all the stars and here's all these things. It's like, now give us your money. So you try to make as much money as possible, and then, sell it at a premium, get your network paid for, and then you sort of can
make money.
And
pretty genius idea, to be honest with you.
It's a great idea. My first day of work, because I was living in DC, it was in New York, where I'd been living, and it was the Adult Swim upfront. It was the first upfront that they ever had, and we did not know what we were doing. We had no one famous, and all these advertisers, eventually we would have these parties that were the most famous part, like Kanye's playing, Jay-Z's playing, like it was like crazy upfronts where people dole out like millions and millions of dollars to bring people out for like 3 minutes, but this time we don't have anyone, and there's no one famous making any of our shows. And that's my first day of work, is the first Adult Swim up front. And the main...
Which, by the way, that for folks, the head of development should be the person who is the most like paramount number one person in upfront. It's not like you were, some like lower level person.
No, this is I'm there and but none of us know what we're doing. Mike Lazo gets on stage with the head of the advertising, who's a real suit, and he doesn't know what to say. It's very awkward. And then they bring out the Rapture, the DFA band, who Lazo loved, but they're not famous.
They start playing House of Jealous Lovers,
and
screaming at the top of their lungs.
If this is not U2, do you know this is not the Rolling Stones? They don't give a fuck. And so basically people are like talking and not booing, but no one's up there with this band that like everyone thinks is going to be like.
I went to Rapture shows at Bowery,
Lazo and all these people were like, this is huge. No one gives a shit. Downstairs, and there's a downstairs, I think it was at the Knitting Factory.
This is Tribeca Knitting Factory.
Yes, Tribeca, yes. Which also not a place like anybody really wants to go.
Yeah, most upfronts, I'll say for folks, are usually at 30 Rock, and they're huge. And it's where every network goes out to flex on all the new shows. And they say, hey, well, we got this new show coming up. We got this. When I was a stylist, I would dress I dressed Josh Gad for upfronts for 1600 Pen. Yes. And it was like a huge fucking deal.
Oh, it's a huge deal. So downstairs, and this is such a tangent, is Danger Mouse is the DJ downstairs. And he had just made the Gray album. But this was a moment where we were like, we all thought no one would be downstairs in this like hang room. Everyone went downstairs to see Danger Mouse and then the Gray album, him do the Gray album. Like literally it just come out. And that was where we're like, oh shit, this guy's gonna be super famous. And we end up making this MF Doom Danger Mouse album called MF Doom, which is sort of like if you care about Adult Swim and like, MF Doom is like the seminal thing. But that was like my first day, and I got in my car and I was like, damn, this is actually pretty cool. I thought it was not going to be corny, but I was like, damn, this is pretty cool. This is weird.
Beats hanging out with my brother.
Yeah, it's hanging out with my brother, watching Aqua Teen and getting stoned and stealing booze from frat houses in my 20s. That was so crazy. And so I get in my car and I drive to Atlanta and I move there. And my first day of work, basically, I thought maybe in the back of my mind he was going to want me to. My job would be to like create a magazine. Like print wasn't totally dead. I was like, maybe he wants some like ancillary, like Adult Swim kind of magazine. And that's what I was
going to say, do you have like imposter syndrome stuff? Because I mean, it's from a lot of these things too. And like, from other interviews that you've, that I've read and other people that know you get handed opportunities and you personally sound like that you don't deserve them and you wouldn't know how to do it. But your track record's pretty fucking good. So like, I'm just trying to connect these dots. I mean, like, what's going on mentally?
look, I don't think I have imposter syndrome. I think I'm good at the things that I do. I work really hard. I mean, and I feel like I'm good at understand the thing I think I'm good at. Like my family's from is from politics or politics adjacent. I grew up in DC. I do feel like I have a pretty good like cognitive like ability to see opportunity and to sort of go with the flow, right? Like I do think I'm pretty good at that. I don't know the things that I'm doing. I also don't think I'm not trying to like do engineering. I'm not trying to be a doctor. Like these aren't that difficult things to do if you can just sort of read a room and figure out what to do. Like I think I have a
Children's
good sense of
Hospital is
humor.
pretty good.
Well, yeah, Children's Hospital is pretty. But you know, like again, it's sort of just like figuring out. So it's funny. Like, look, I also don't really do this. And when I do talk about it, I do feel like very lucky. You know, I'm not great at talking about myself. So I don't necessarily feel imposter syndrome, but I don't feel like, you know, I do work really hard. But as we talked about, friend of the show, guest of the show, like Chris Storer, it's like when I see the work he does, I don't know, there's something about like seeing him on like Make the Bear. And it's like, not that I don't think I could do that. There's a certain respect you have for like a certain craft. I don't know if I would say I even have a craft. Like if I have a talent specifically, it's like I can facilitate other people's intentions. Like I'm good at figuring out what is it that you want to do. I will help you I can help you do not my version, because I do feel I'm egoless in that way. Like the best version of the thing you want to do. It is what I think. Like I always say, people think that they fucking hate network executives for good or bad. They fucking hate them. You hear people talk shit all the time about it. I was like, Faulkner had an editor. You know, like Ralph Ellison left his estate to his editor. Like people, like every good writer has an editor. I don't know why TV or film doesn't quite have the same relationship.
Is this like a Moses and Aaron vibe you're hinting at here?
No, I'm not. No, I mean, I think maybe in a sort of archetypal sense, but yes, everyone is supposed to have someone in their life. I think I always preferred to be an editor than a writer. I don't love to write. I can do it. I love to help other people figure out what is it they want to do. It doesn't always have to be writing. It doesn't always have to be comedy, but I do think that, like if I've located the thing I like to do and that I think I'm good at, is that I can help you see your vision. I can help you. I can understand it. And I know that a lot of people sometimes don't necessarily see the clearest path forward to making it, you know, like they get clouded for whatever reason. It's like, how do you move some of it away? And how do you get your vision to the finish line? I think I'm very good at helping your intention get realized. And so, yeah, again, that's a weird, it's like, not imposter syndrome. Maybe just sort of the Jewish part about me that feels like weird talking about myself, but I don't really feel like I have like some like it's not like I have some like vocation, you know, that I've like, you know what I mean? That I've like learned and I've like, it's like.
Well, the startling thing though, is I think you're in an industry that's very focused and in most cases lives off of vanity. It's about energy. It's heat seeking missiles, right?
Yeah.
Of just the LA, especially on like the TV, filmmaking, all that side. But the thing that it sounds like you're the most interested in is actually, for most people, it sounds like a personal hell because you're the number two. You're the most important person in the room, but you're not the person that the story's getting written about, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that is, you gotta, I don't know what it is, but like there's gotta be some sort of confidence or peace or some sort of joy that you have to where you're like, okay being adjacent to the fame and not being the fame.
Totally. But I would say that's where my like this kind of thing with Chris comes from about is like feeling absolutely okay to not be the center of it, but just to be involved in it. And like Rick Rubin has it. Mm-hmm. Like I think Chris Storer there's a bunch of people. I don't know where it comes from. I'm just saying that there's a certain amount of like security or comfort I had growing up. I had a lot of insecurities. I have a ton of insecurities, but I think, and I probably do have some level of imposter syndrome on some level from experiences growing up. I don't think that's how they're playing out here. But what I think of not caring about it is like, I've always basically felt if I'm like working and I'm being paid to work and the things I'm making, I like,
win.
That's a win. I was like, literally, that's a win. And frankly, I think it's a lot easier for me to continue to win when I'm not at the front. You know, like I feel like I have more mobility because I don't have one kind of thing that I like to do. I don't have a brand.
Yeah, you're not really pigeonholed. No. I agree with that. You can kind of do anything.
Yeah, it's like I've had, talked to friends who have had issues with that on like other people's shows where they're like, I'm doing that. And why am I not getting the credit for it? And I was like, well, it's the other guy's name on the show.
Right.
Right? Like they win or lose based on this success. You can continue to keep working. It's like there's a certain amount of, there's a certain reward, but there's also a major risk when you're like the front and center and you're the main creative person. And again, if you have to do that, I also feel there's a drive to do that. But again, I don't know why I feel comfortable in that position. But again, I would tell anybody that would ever want to get in this business or any business, and I would say that what is it that you offer, right? The number one thing would be, what do you offer? What is unique that is special to what you offer? And often the first thing people say is not necessarily the right answer. It's whatever's right. It's like the note behind the note. It's what's ever beneath that. And it took me some time to figure it out. But I was like, I get the same enjoyment of helping my friend design his restaurant that I do out of making or developing a Rick and Morty. It's the same endorphin. It's the same sense of joy. It's like helping someone figure the thing out and get their thing across is something I find like as like the same kind of whatever emotional, physiological, like dopamine reward is the same to me.
Yeah.
But then I have other friends who are like, damn, I just got to I got to write. Like if I am not writing and I am not creating, then I am not, an artist. And I don't feel like I just want to be working with people I like, life is hard and this fucking business is fucking brutal. And it's like, all we got is the thing that we're making. And I don't really and this may be a way of figuring out how to keep working, I think what made me a good network executive when I was one was most of my job, 90% of my job is just saying no in the nicest way. I mean, that's all the job is saying no, is finding ways to like.
Ooh, okay. Give me an example. I just pitched you this show. It's a garbage dump. But you think maybe someday I might make something other than.
Well, I mean, first of all, I will say if someone's pitching me, I've always felt very strongly that you have to tell them no in the room. Like the idea that you say, oh, this was great. And then you call their manager, because that's another thing. It's like no one wants to take accountability, or few people. There's some great executives. Like I've, worked with some awesome ones, especially comedy executives. But most people don't want to say no. Okay. They want to shirk the responsibility because it doesn't feel good. But like always saying no. So always usually, it has to be specific, but I almost always would find something in it that's like, whether it's like, look, you got something in this tone here, you have something in this character here, just some kind of creative way to give someone, because one thing you don't really want to do is like put the fire out. Like if you can't put the light out, like that to me would be too devastating. Maybe, even on someone that you feel might deserve it. It's like, I just don't, who's that for me to, who am I to say that? Like you want to keep them like still engaged to like continue this. This hamster, running that hamster wheel. That's not for me. Let God decide that. I just don't. So I think that I would find some way of communicating no, but in a way that like talked again. It's without a very. I normally would be very specific. You'd pitch me your show, and I'd be like, all right, look. Sure.
Character A is great.
Or something
Character
even
B
more
falls
about
flat.
just like, look, you are into something that is very interesting. Or guess what? This whole idea, I see what you're trying to do, but you have to get more personal, right? You got to figure out what's the thing that keeps you up at night. That kind of
right.
No. Because this isn't it, but something that's there, like that kind of thing. Like always give them something, because I think that that's really important. But and by the way, this brings me back to like my first day when I walked back to Adult Swim is when I thought I was going to run a magazine, and that's when you thought I would have imposter syndrome. I really didn't know what the job was, and then I was like, oh shit, I'm going to write. The bumps were the black and white cards that go on and before, and I was like, maybe I'm just here to write bumps. So I wrote bumps for a while. Like I really didn't know. This guy said, you'll figure out your job, but the one thing you have to do is you have to respond to all of these letters of pitches. And we were so basically the way pitches in Hollywood work is like an agent calls and says, we're setting up our client for pitches. No one knew what Adult Swim was, and we were in Atlanta. So there was no one setting up any calls for us, right? Mm-hmm. There was literally like 200 envelopes of people writing handwritten or printed out pitches for TV shows that were just mailed to them. Like it was like a fan. This is
like a record label in a way.
It's a total record label. And he goes, and so Mike Lazar says, we'll figure out what you want to do here, but the one thing you got to do is these envelopes are piling up, and you need to put them into 3 boxes. You need to put them into yes, no, maybe. And I read through 200 pitches and it was 200 no's. And one thing I did was I wrote a handwritten note to everyone back. Because again, I didn't know it. I was 24 years old.
That's incredible.
So I wrote a handwritten note. And I have heard other people later who became writers. I did hear at least one person do some kind of comedy stand-up that said that kept them going. Was that I got a letter from a dude named Nick Weidenfeld when I sent in a pitch. And he wrote me a handwritten note with real notes back. And like, that's maybe that informed me because I heard that and I'm like, damn, that's like really meaningful, you know?
Yeah. And a lot of people, you don't even get that. You don't even get the opportunity to try to talk to the person who can set up the meeting for you to do the pitch.
No, in fact, I learned way later it's probably illegal because you do need some kind of NDA sign because someone would sue you and say you stole my idea. Like, you're really not even supposed to take unsolicited pitches, you know? So it's like the whole thing is crazy.
Yeah.
So I go through all of that. They're all no's, right? There's no yes of some dude at home. They're all basically versions of, there's the 3 weirdos that live in an apartment. They're all just like some version of Aqua Teen Hunger Force.
Friends?
No, Aqua Teen Hunger. They're literally,
yeah.
it's a computer and headphones and a hat, and they live in a. It's like
they got a crazy neighbor. Look out!
Yeah, you do realize the human mind can also be very limited, and so they're all no's, and I am like, damn, what am I gonna do? And this is where I think when I said the way I feel my job is to facilitate other people's intentions is I was like, I got to do something. And so I was like, damn, I need to find someone to work with. And I was like, I love Robert Smigel. And if you know Robert Smigel, he created TV Funhouse. He was like one of the head writers on SNL, and he made all these funny cartoons. And I call him, and he's famous. And I call him, call SNL, and I was like, can you put me in touch with Robert Smigel's office? And he picks up the phone, and he's like, I'm like here once a month. And I was like, I'm calling from Adult Swim. I'm a huge fan of yours. And would you ever want to make a show for us? And he was like, no. But I'll explain why. He's like, I do know what Adult Swim is. I know what Space Ghost is. He goes, look, I got an autistic son. I got a special needs son. And he needs a tremendous amount of, his care is tremendously expensive. And you're not paying what I would need at Adult Swim. I know that much. So I can't do it. But I do recommend you call a guy named Dino Stamatopoulos. He's the funniest guy I know, and he'll do it. And I talked to my brother, who's also a comedy nerd, more of a nerd about this stuff than I am. And like, he bought you remember the show Mr. Show with Bob and Dave?
Yeah.
He bought the like Mr. Show behind the scenes book and everything. And I say, man, you're not going to believe this, Daniel. That's my brother. I talked to Robert Smigel. And he's like, oh shit. And he said, yeah, he said I should call a guy named Dino Stamatopoulos. And he goes, whoa, Dino Stamatopoulos is a legend. And I was like, really? And he goes, he wrote every sketch that you liked of Mr. Show. Like, he wrote the most famous sketch, the audition. And I was like, oh shit. So I set up a meeting with Dino, and we talked for a while, and he's telling me the shit he's interested in. And we made Moral Oral. And that was the sort of first thing that came, that and Robot Chicken. Cause again, stop motion. That's how both those came about. But I realized in that, like in Robot Chicken, Moral Oral, those early shows, Tim and Eric, Super Jail, my job was to leave Atlanta and go to LA and sometimes New York, like basically to take Mike Lazo's vision and the shows they were all making in Atlanta and take that intention and make it and broaden it. Like, that was my job. Like, I felt I knew what was funny. It was like, all right, we can do some live action, but it all has to be in this sensibility. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's the head. He's the point of view. He's the godhead of this thing. And my job, because he hates leaving, he hates traveling. I think to be honest, not some imposter syndrome shit. I do believe he only really hired me outside of the Faulkner thing because I was the first person he met. Like, no one had ever met him. Like, no one he hated.
I don't know.
No, true.
Okay.
He didn't know, he didn't leave Atlanta. And once he saw that I would leave, he never left. Like, he's really like, hated flying. Like, he really,
get that.
So when I met him, he was like, oh, you came here. This means something. You're going to hire you. Like, I came to him. So that's how all of that stuff basically started. I was like, oh, I understand. Oh, I thought I'd write bumps. I thought I'd create a magazine. I was like, no, my job is to take this guy's vision and what he did with Aqua Teen Hunger Force and Space Ghost and Squidbillies and these like early shows out of this space and go, now if we're going to become a network that is more, that it takes up more time? How do we expand that vision without ever doing something that undermines it? And to me, like the Boondocks became a huge version of that. You're like, that it's like, that feels like it's adjacent to that, but it's about a totally different world, and it feels like it's bigger, but the tone of it feels consistent with being on this, like, whatever, quote, irreverent network or something. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Same with Tim and Eric. That's live action, but it feels like we all watch it and go, you know, and I remember like all of us watching like Tom Goes to the Mayor and being like, this feels like this is the kinds of minds that would be here, but they're out in LA. You know, that becomes my job to help grow that out. And I would basically did that the rest of my career, you know, like I would go places and like, how do I help take this thing and sort of broaden it out and make it bigger? And maybe that speaks to the same thing you were talking about before, which is like, I don't need to be the center of that. I just like I like the work, and I like, you know, helping people grow their shit out. And
yeah, because in both roles, you know, you're that number two in the sense with Mike at Adult Swim, but then also in helping these other people develop and make their shows.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, still being, because, you know, I have a lot of friends who work and live in LA and they make stuff. And, you know, everyone always it says the same thing, like you were saying. It's like, it's just so hard to make something. Like, you know, not to have the idea, but to actually get it produced, to get it, you know, on air. And then even now when it feels like we're in this content glut with, you know, siloed things on Jerby and Goober and all these little apps, whatever people are using, it's like, yeah, I watch this on Dingle Dog. And you're like, oh shit, man. You know, so it's like all those things that are out there. It's still hard to get shit made.
It's impossible.
You know,
I was telling my kid was like, you know, he was like, I want to write a cartoon. I was like, let's do it. Let's go. And we started working on it, and you know, show him how to use Final Draft, and like we're writing the show, and he goes, so is this going to happen? Like, is this going to get made? Like, are we doing it? And I was like, we're doing it. What are you talking about? And he was like, but what if it does? It's like not real. And I was like, we're doing what every dude in a coffee shop is doing, and then living in LA. Like, this is it. Is it going to get made?
Yeah.
I don't know. Probably.
Maybe on YouTube.
Probably not. Maybe on YouTube. But guess what? We're doing the work. And if we're, again, I was telling a 10-year-old this, like, this is the work. Like, this is
telling your son.
Yeah,
also,
but like, this is it. If we're doing this because you think this is going to get on TV, let's go fucking shoot some baskets or something. Like, this is it. And this experience needs to be really fun while we do it. Because I can tell you if it's not, then it's definitely not going to get made. That's one thing I also know. You can tell when there's joy in something and when there's not.
Ooh, yeah. That's heavy.
You know?
I mean, because that's just on art in general.
Yes.
Where you look at every bad album, film, whatever that is, you can see, I don't know. You can like see an energy of when someone's at a place doing what they don't want to do, you know. Go to a coffee shop where a person's like fucking pissed that they're there. And it's like, oh yeah, I can see it. You don't want to be here.
Totally.
You don't want to do this.
And you can, and when it's a struggle, you can, and I mean, this is especially true, I think, in comedy, and it's, you know, in animation, it's like, but if there's no joy in it, everybody, the audience can sense it, and it's not going to get made. So it's like, you absolutely need that, you know, and it's just not how so many people go into it.
You mentioned the Faulkner scholar earlier. What the fuck is it about Faulkner? So when my wife and I were dating, she gave me, I think, As I Lay Dying, and she had talked about, you know, she's a journalism graduate, like super, super smart. Again, you know, also loves all that kind of different types of comedy, turned me on to all that stuff. I faked liking it early on when we were dating so I could prove to her that like I was cool.
Sure.
When I later was like, what the fuck did I just watch? And now I love it, you know, but like, you know, she gave me that book, and she also gave me, what else did she give me?
But if it's not Sound and the Fury, then it's
it was Sound and the Fury. Yeah. That was the other stuff. Yeah, because she gave me Sound and the Fury first, and then she was like, well, if not, you can read As I Lay Dying.
And As I Lay Dying is the easier one to read.
Yes.
The more straightforward.
And yeah, and I started reading Sound and the Fury, and I was like, this is a tire fire. I'm like, is this, you know, and then also I felt weird because I'm like, oh, this is like what people do in college is they read this book, and it doesn't make any sense. But you know, it's like going to someone and talking about how you, I don't know, how you're like a fan of Captain Beefheart all of a sudden, and someone's like, oh shit, this guy gets it. So connect those things. Connect Captain Beefheart and William Faulkner.
Well, I mean, I can tell you, for me, the thing I really always like really thought was amazing about it one is like the world building of it, that all these books are connected. It feels like pretty special. But specifically, the thing I was very into was the tragic comedy. And that was what I was writing about in college, was like, you would take these things that I didn't think people thought were funny. Like most of the critical writing around it was not how funny, absurdly funny the thing was. Like very specifically in Sound and the Fury, there's this character Quentin, who's in love with his sister, kills himself, and the suicide affects the family. But he can't kill, like, and it's written not straight, but it's like he's doing all these things to kill himself. Like he puts on these weights to walk into the Boston.
Very Harold and Maude.
Yes, very Harold and Maude.
Obviously,
and he can't. And it's just like the weights aren't heavy enough, and he can't kill himself. It's like all those. He's got to kill himself at a very specific time, but his watch has stopped working. Like all these things that I find, very funny. That, but like deeply tragic, I think is what I was always responded to, and I found the writing like really beautiful. Why this guy Mike Lazo loved it too, I think came, and again, didn't go to college, just like grew up. I think there's something, I was also pretty obsessed with the South maybe at the time too. It's again why I was like fine ultimately to move there. But like there's nothing feels more Southern. I mean, there's always this one expression I remember, I think it's like in Light in August, but there's this one expression where he goes, the lugubrious effluvium. Oh, and I'm just like, that's the funniest two words. Those are the funniest two words you can possibly put together. And also nothing seems like foghorn leghorn or something. I mean, it just sounds so over the top. The lugubrious effluvium. I think they're talking about like candle wax or something. Like, I don't know. It's so funny. And so I do think that there's an absurdity to it. I didn't think I was into it just because I was like, the shit is pretentious and sounds really smart. I really do think like there's something about the almost Dada kind of writing and storytelling in weird words and the actual sense of place. That's the other thing. It's like the sense of place, this place that he created, the Yoknapatawpha County, like this fictional Mississippi place is so, I don't know why, but it is certainly like this weird lightning in a bottle moment that changed my whole life. Cause I don't know if without that,
I mean, you're talking to a guy who loves Beefheart.
And again, too, I think,
I mean, I get it.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, it's so funny to compare Faulkner to Beefheart, but yeah, yeah. So, but I mean,
yeah, it's heavy stuff that requires work.
Yeah,
I guess.
And I do think that there's a certain amount of Adult Swim that especially, and by the way, it's not like work to the untrained eye, but it is like you develop a certain muscle. It's a certain language.
Yeah.
And I think if you show a lot of people, like even early Space Ghost, it doesn't make sense. And I think if you don't recognize the language and if you haven't worked that muscle, then it doesn't hit. It doesn't make sense. That's probably the same with Faulkner, to be honest. If like you were to go read, like I couldn't go read Faulkner now, 20 something years later. It would be very hard for me. Like I've lost that muscle. And I think, when you watch a lot of Adult Swim and you start understanding, you go, oh, there's a language here that I'm now understanding, and a rhythm here that I get, the really weird shit. You know what I mean? Like I just showed my son Xavier Renegade Angel. And I mean, that was like, he has a pretty absurd sense of humor and he likes like Aqua Teen stuff. And I showed him this show that I made with, Vernon Chapman and John Lee. And he was like, damn, like my son was like, this is a bridge too far. Like I literally cannot understand a word that's being said visually, dialogue. I cannot get this shit. And so, but I think that you develop that muscle if you like it, and it's a rhythm. You know what I mean? It's a style of joke telling. And I think that same with Tim and Eric. Like it might hit on a guttural level, but it absolutely might not. But that doesn't mean it's not you can't acquire the taste, through a little bit of like watching, you know what I mean?
Well, I think there's also, people love the things that they worked really hard to understand or achieve. I think like that's why so many people love, like crazy musicians or bands or, I mean, I always relate stuff to music, but like, I think that sort of stuff builds community way more than all of us talking about Jurassic Park being an incredible film.
By the way, I think it's right. Yeah, that's totally right. And I think that was definitely the early success of like Adult Swim 2. And look, the early success, and which is a huge part because of us, Mike Lazo specifically, buying and licensing The Family Guy, which was like a failed show on Fox. Like if you watch Family Guy right after The Simpsons, The Family Guy kind of doesn't make sense. It is weirder. Yeah. It's way more edgy. You know, they're doing some fucked up stuff. If you like something and you know it's a bit more work, or you know other people might not immediately get it, Captain Beefheart, it definitely creates a sense of community. And I think that's huge. You know, by the way, Rick and Morty, so many people, you know, like, but again, I think it's not so far out that you can't get it. The jokes are all there. It's just, it's a sense of putting in the work, you know, and that it doesn't sort of isn't immediately accessible. I think definitely, I had never really thought about it, but I certainly think that would be part of the success, right?
Yeah, and I also think the medium of cartoons, which you're kind of, I mean, you've made other stuff, I'll be clear, but like, I think most people know you for the cartoon stuff you've done. And I think the medium of cartoons, there's an absurdity that's attached to it based on us, I don't know, maybe growing up watching like Looney Tunes or something, but it's okay for very strange things to happen in a cartoon, and you don't question it as easy as you would watching live action.
Totally. I definitely, I think that, you know, something about making cartoons is that when you talk to most like network executives, and I find this like this isn't like not just network executives, but people, I'm sort of an immediate question that someone almost always asks is sort of the raison d'etre. Like, why does it have to be animated? Which I think is kind of I think it's not a silly question. I actually think it's an important question, but I actually don't think that people understand. Many people, not everyone, but a lot of people that ask the question of, so why does this need to be a cartoon? Why does it have to be animated? Actually don't really understand the question, right? They're going like, does it have to be, can they go to outer space? Like, why aren't they going to outer space? Can they go back in time? Like, that is often what they mean, right? Is it talking animals? And something that, you know, talked about basically since I started this, and something, you know, maybe Mike Lazo told me early on, possibly. I'd like to attribute to him.
But you can also just take credit yourself.
But it could be me. But it's been so long doing this. But basically was, even if it was me, I'll just attribute it to somebody else. Yeah, that's the imposter syndrome shit.
There you go. It's in there.
Is that when Homer chokes Bart in the Simpsons, especially in the early Simpsons, like that can't be live action. Maybe now it could be because shit's gotten wild. But like then,
I'm not watching.
But
that
no
show.
one wants to watch it. But
About.
somehow, so it's like. That's a straight family show, especially early on. It's like, I burned, you know, don't eat the cookies. Like, that's really all it is. It's very domestic, right? It's a very just sort of dysfunctional family, domestic. There's no aliens in it yet. There's nothing happening. It's like, but why is that animated? And it is animated because Homer can choke Bart, and that is it. And it is like, you can have a father who is like gloriously bad as a dad, such a buffoon that if that were done live action, it would either be too unrealistic to be funny, or too gnarly to be funny, right? And that to me is like, that's so small that people don't think about it. So it's like when you think about making cartoon, like why does it have to be? There's a lot of reasons for it, but yeah,
it's an easier world to enter, but I think it lets us push our minds further than what other things would.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, straight up, like Boondocks to me is like, you couldn't like the you know, early on. I mean, basically they made a pilot, a presentation, like a 3-minute presentation for Fox on the Boondocks before we bought it and redeveloped it. And in it, the character of Ruckus, who's a real self-hating black dude who would be a MAGA dude now or whatever. He in the pilot or in the presentation, these kids throw a baseball through the window. These like white next door neighbors, and he's like, "Oh, you threw your baseball. Your kids lost your baseball or whatever," and throws it back when it's obviously like supposed to be like a racial, they were throwing it through the window on purpose, right? And it was and I was talking to Aaron about it. The Aaron Magruder who created it, I was like, if we make this show like that, honestly, like, is that how it's supposed to go? Because I love this and I love the show, but this feels soft. Like, this doesn't feel like the satire is hitting. Like, if that's what you want to do, you got to tell me. But I feel like there's so much more there. And he's like, oh yeah, they made us change that for Fox. Like, kids were supposed to have thrown this is what we ended up doing, I believe, in the pilot. He said, oh no, they made us change it. The kids the white kids across the way threw a brick through the window. And he goes, wow. Oh, kids, you must have been playing with this out back. Sorry. And he throws it back. And you're like, oh my God, that's so much funny. Like his delusion of wanting to be accepted is so much, the satire is so much harsher and so much funnier. Yeah. But imagine like that live action. Like that would be, it would just be so, I mean, again, all bets off in this day and age, but like definitely then it would be like, that's too brutal. But like, it allowed him to go so far. The animation, same with South Park. It just allows you to go so far with the satire and like really cut deep and still have it be like really laugh out loud, which live action has to serve as something a bit different, I think.
Yeah.
Or to serve it differently.
I agree. What would you say so someone's like, man, I just heard this pod, whatever. Nick Weidenfeld's a G. Whether they're time crisis heads or whatever, but like the greatest cartoons of all time. Just give me a list of 5.
I mean,
or 3. Who cares?
I mean, like growing up. This is another thing that happened when I took this when I started working at Adult Swim, because I was like, I don't really know much about cartoons, and
that's perfect.
And he was like, Mike Lazo was like, so what? And when we talked about it, I realized animation, the way we were approaching animation was simply a means to an end, is that we could not afford to make something live. This was the cheapest. This was the only way we were going to get what we thought funny across. So it had to be our medium. Like, we could do it for a 10th of the price of, going and shooting something live action, getting a set together or whatever. And so my relationship, like I don't have like, not that I don't have reverence for it, but I would say growing up, like the most important thing to me was a show Freakazoid that was a Sunday morning show. That was the most important.
That's my show, man.
I just grew up, dude. And that was like through my high school years. Like I was just like, that show, I don't know why.
That cop was off the wall.
Amazing.
Freakazoid is one of the greatest shows ever. And it's a show I will like have found. I would torrented it way back in the day when I was trying to find it. I remember I went to the Virgin Megastore in Times Square because this is, eons ago, obviously, right when that existed, because I was with my buddies and it was late and he was we were at his apartment and we saw an ad and it was like the Freakazoid things are finally on DVD because they were in like purgatory. And then it was I bought the Animaniacs collection on DVD and the Freakazoid stuff. And we just rewatched them over and over and over again.
That's so,
like,
I gotta bring, this is one where it's like, cause I don't even know where it would be. I just have to watch that with my kid. I just like, I hope it holds up, but in my mind,
it does. Especially him, just like the fact that he never flies. No. He doesn't have any fucking powers and he's there. And then like the non sequiturs are things that like I've referenced like to this day.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so that's so awesome, because it is like a handful of people that would remember that, and I just
dude, and I still sing Freakazoid, like the theme music all the time.
Dude, yeah, perfect. It's I remember being such a perfect show, and also feeling like sort of I think this feeling because I of extended adolescence with it, where it was like friends of mine, you'd crash and like be like 14 or 15 for me because I'm a bit older than you. And just like, let's put on fucking cartoons. And like, that was one that like hit. I don't know. Like, so
Cosgrove.
Yeah, so that would say that I loved, and one of the reasons, so it's like, wouldn't be like, these are the shows I always go back to. Well, so I would absolutely say The Simpsons. That to me is like, I started watching it when I was 8 years old. I started watching it on Tracy Ullman. Like I remember the shorts, and to be able to have something grow up with you is pretty life-changing. Like, I left it for years, but then I had a son who likes to he likes when he watches something, he watches it all. So like I've gotten back into watching and I go, you know what? Later season Simpsons, people want to hate on it. They're good. They totally hold up. They totally hold up. And that, I mean, even the fact that that's considered a hot take is crazy. It's like, you can hate the shit. You can say it lost its way, but it is so much better than most other things that are on. And it, for the most part, still hits.
I agree with that.
You know what I mean? And you watch it through the eyes of a kid and you're like, yeah, there's ups and downs, but the thing's been on 30 something years and they're still able to like say shit. So I'm like, The Simpsons is my whole life. My whole childhood on has been a part of my life.
What are the best top 3 Simpsons seasons?
I can't pull shit like that. I'll tell you, one of the best episodes of all time and maybe he's like moving to Hollywood too. And I know this isn't that deep a cut, but I will say anybody watching this, also having just heard a lot about TV and film for a while, is the one where they go to make the movie in Springfield, and they're making the action film in Springfield, and Nelson becomes the lead and not Bart, and like how having Hollywood come to Springfield just like tears it apart is like, so it's impeccable, it's perfect. So I mean, I would probably say, I still think when I think of making a TV show now, I would always say everyone does need to go to season, I would just always go to season 1. Season 1 and 2. Yeah, I just think you understand, even that they opened on a Christmas episode. I mean, it's just, there's something about the decisions that were made that I think also show you where a show can go. So I would have probably go like 1 to 3, like season 1 and season 3. But I know that there's these these late seasons. Again, I'm not like well versed enough to say it. And so, and I don't want to feel like an imposter, but I do feel like that show, when a show can mean so much to you over your whole life, and then you have a kid and that kid wants to watch it, it's like, it holds such a special place that almost nothing else can, to be 8 years old and have something start. And then so that's 2. There was a show, and again, I don't know, I haven't revisited it, but it was really, when I started at Adult Swim, they had acquired, right before I had started, this show called Home Movies that Brendan Small had done, that then, I'd make the show Metalocalypse.
Wasn't he like a Channel 21 dude?
No. He was like a Berkeley School of Music. I mean, I created, he made the show Metalocalypse, if you ever watched Metalocalypse.
Yes.
So he made Metalocalypse.
Yeah.
But that show, that was Lauren Bouchard's show, who would go on to make Bob's Burgers and all this. Like, he had a show about all these kids making, home movies. And that show, to me, did something with like dealing with being very funny, but also conversational and also emotional, that I think is a very interesting thing that is very hard to pull off. And people try now and they go, oh, there's no real jokes in this. Like, I'm also really anti whatever new wave of like sad comedy, depressing shit. Like, people need jokes. And the next wave will be like straight Family Guy jokes,
Yeah.
So, but I do think like Home Movies was a reason that I understood, like, it holds, again, a place in my heart outside of Best of All Time. I would put it there because I think it gets so weird, because part of me, like, I'm too deep in this business to answer that question. Cause I'm like, I watch these things go, well, I want you to watch it, because if you give a shit about like Bob's Burgers or something, you're like, wow, what's happening with comedy.
No, man,
you watch
everyone wants to know the thing behind it.
And I would say like Home Movies is it. Then, and I will say, I think Boondocks no one's ever made another show like the Boondocks. And the culture has needed one and needs one. And they still have not managed to make anything that satirizes culture that's young and black. It blows my mind that there's not another one that was able to do it. So I think that, to me, it's like very short-lived. There are episodes in that, like the Martin Luther King episode, where he comes back, is like, that might be one of the best half hours of TV as far as I'm concerned. He's still alive and he goes to McDonald's and sees that he's selling Happy Meals. Like, it's so good. So that one, and then and I don't think I would have said this, except like, again, I think culture's changing and I think culture needs it. I hadn't watched it in so long. Look, obviously South Park. We've talked about it. South Park is my Simpsons. South Park is it. And
I think it's the sharpest show in terms of things that are going on that people are talking about, that cause you to revisit and change your perspective on it.
Yes. And again, being deep in it, the way the show shifts and changes, not just because of the culture, but because of how Matt and Trey want to create, like their creative process. It's like amazing, like how they, when, they decide to go 6 days to air, and the thing becomes like kind of, they're like,
great,
what?
Great
like we actually, that I think is the number one thing I would have anybody who wants to make almost anything watch. Has nothing to do with animation. Just where you're like, there's no one way to make something. Every show should be sort of bespokely built around the creative, right? Like the creative center. There's not like, you can't just like, a writing room looks like this and a production pipeline looks like this. And you look at 6 days to air and you see how Matt and Trey have essentially built like pipelines and process and infrastructure around what they do. Like you could give them a year to write an episode and they're going to wait to the last 6 days, right? They will procrastinate. So you have to give them a timeline, right? You have to tell them this is it. That works directly into their best mode of creation. And so they built in.
Do you believe the best art, it comes from constraints?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Adult Swim is, yes, I think absolutely the best the best art comes from constraints. Definitely the best writing in television and film. I think that there's like 2 examples. Like I could, I think maybe it's only because I've worked with him. I would say maybe Spike Jonze is the only person who's like, give me an infinite amount of time and an infinite amount of dollars and I'll make something that's good. Do you know what I mean? He's the only person I know, the only one. I'm sure there's 1 or 2 others that respond to this, but I would say almost everyone else. Literally, Adult Swim is created out of us having limitations and us giving limitations because of, how little we had. I think, I helped create the show for Vice when I was doing Vice, the Desus and Mero show, which to me is a highlight of my career. But I also think, and Mero, the guys, and specifically Mero has talked about it. It was like the best version of that show was the Vice version, not the Showtime version where they had and that's very specifically because of the constraints were by design. Shooting in an office, giving them no writing staff, all of that was a design to get the best version of their creative out there. And so, I think you give, you learn. It's survival mode. You will figure out how do you make the best thing when you're limited. But specifically with Matt and Trey, it's not just the limitations because they have all the money and they can do whatever they want. It is, I really believe they
don't even need to make it. I think that's the thing is like, what's the point when you have that much money now, which by the way, they are smart and they earned it all themselves, but like, you don't even need to make it anymore. So what's the point?
No, I mean, I think
that's great.
It's pure joy still of it. Even as hard as it is, you get the joy. But you also know that they could say we're going to make 1 episode a year and we're going to take all year. You just know those motherfuckers are waiting to the last possible minute. Not everyone waits to the last minute, but they do. Yeah. And they go, you could give us a day longer. It's not going to matter. You need to tell us. And that's that's also what drove its, topicality. What changed the whole thing it changed the whole.
Making it more linear.
Yes. Yeah. All of it changed when they did that. But it was also like, guess what, guys? This is the only way we can work. You could give us all 3 months with the writing staff. We're just going to wait till the last week. So let's just create a process. And to me, that's the most beautiful thing for anybody creating anything. You know what I mean? Like whether it's this podcast, it's like, what do you need? And it's not going to necessarily be what everybody else needs or anybody else needs. And I think that, you didn't ask, but one of the big problems with the way I think the Hollywood infrastructure obviously needs a certain kind of like certain systems and best practices in place to like make sure the money's spent well and shit gets on the air. Right. But there is one way to make anything. And I think that's one of the problems we see with all this, like people just going, okay, what you need X amount of time, you need X amount of staff, you need to shoot X amount of days. And I think that instead of the process, and again, there's best practices, but people going, well, what exactly do you need? And how does your brain work to make the best thing within a certain kind of budgetary constraint? Right. You know what I mean? Right. No one talks that way. Or I don't want to say no one. I'm sure there are people that do, but
yeah, no, I mean, this is all, you're speaking to a larger, I don't know, vibe for lack of a better term. Right. But like, I agree. I think, cause I'm definitely someone who comes from, I love Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies, which for folks who don't know, it's Brian Eno, the producer, legendary, whatever, who had this deck of cards and you would draw from a deck of cards when you basically had writer's block, and it would cause you to change your perspective. But in a way, if you drew the card, you had to do it. So it might be like remove the third verse or something dumb. So it would force these constraints upon you, but it made things exist. And I think especially when you're talking about being in an industry where you work so hard and things don't exist and you start forcing constraints to exist is the bigger thing. Because otherwise we're just kicking around thought bubbles all day and we don't actually get to enjoy or better ourselves from the art that's created.
Yeah. And look, talk a lot about Chris Storer and the Bear, but it's like, this is a show that's created out of constraints, you know, budgetary constraints, day constraints, like, you know, acting. It's like, that is just show that I think by the way, I would say one of the reasons it feels that show specifically has the intensity that it has, you know, the urgency that it has, is because of how the thing was fucking made. It was urgent. Right. They made the thing very, very fast with very little money and very little time. And it's like, you know, this wasn't a show that was a slow vibey show. It was a show about we gotta go. And it's like, that feels like all part of it. And I think that you look at that, you look at 6 days, you look at how things are made, and the best stuff is made in this, like, is in unique, bespoke ways, you know?
I mean, that's how I think a lot of music should be made.
Yeah. Well, I think music tends to music and artists, you know, there tends to be more room for that, I think, because you can always just go into your room and make something if you need to. Like, making TV requires and film requires so much money and infrastructure, even when it's cheap. And I think that, it would be great, you know, to look a little more to like how people make music, and how can you make something that feels special to the people, you know, based on how that feels special because of how it's made by the people that are making it. And music should absolutely, the stories you hear of your favorite albums, you know, always have like usually some very weird thing put around it, you know, some weird, unique production process of like, we all moved into this weird house, or we all, you know what I mean? There's just more. Yeah.
Ready for me to tie this into fashion for someone who's be like, why didn't they talk about sweaters?
Let's go.
Is all the best like clothing stuff that everyone loves, designers, you know, icons, whatever. They had very limited options for what they were going to wear, what they were going to do. You know, no one's the only extreme example that people love, but like, I'm not going to give this dude credit, was like the Duke of Windsor, who, you know, fucking Nazi sympathizer. First off, I'll just be very clear that everyone who loves that guy, I get it that he invented, you know, or found a way to manipulate to create the whole soft shoulder, the English Italian thing. Great, fine. Take that, set it aside. But like, you know, I went nuts being obsessed with Cary Grant for a while, like any other dork. And I managed to get in touch with his daughter. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yo, can you explain this stuff to me? Can you? And she was so sweet. She was basically like, this, like, there wasn't a mystery. It was what he had. Like, you're referencing this look, you're referencing this thing. It was just what he had. And so, like, you know, what people love is not so much, and Cary Grant said this as he was, you know, dying, is like, it was the person that was created, not the jacket, not the clothes, not the thing. There was a limit, right? There was a limit. And so, like, when you have that limit, you're just forced to exist within it and be the best that you can be around it.
Yeah.
Like,
absolutely. I mean, I think that the idea, I can't think of anybody.
We got Cary Grant, we got Adult Swim, it's all coming together.
The way you were talking really reminded me of this article I read like so many years ago, and I cannot remember. Don't think it was in Vice, but it was like Chloe Sevigny on the street, like maybe before even she was in Kids. So it wouldn't have been Vice.
This is early.
They might have been then way pre-Vice. But this idea of like, who is this girl who's just like picked up all the, like, basically put the most incredible weird outfits together, and she's basically like, it's just stuff I have, right? And it's like, you make something with the tools you have. How rare have I ever been like, oh, that person had infinite access to funds and clothing, and they're just, I mean, who gives a shit? Like, I want to see you pull together all your weird stuff from your house and make something. And I feel like that's when, like, any iconic figure that I've ever met is doing something like that. Yeah, maybe you spend your money on like one piece that you just really love, that you know becomes your piece. But again, I rarely have seen a celebrity, a person, you know, just somebody with wealth that is like, you know, like I said, went nuts and had great, you know, still had great taste, and you're like, oh yeah, that was sick. I just can't think of it. I mean, you know, I do look at like a well-dressed man. I do look at like Will Welch, you know, who I mean, I've known Southern guy. And again, I think that probably informs a lot of why I think who I do think now at this point, being that, you know, editor of GQ, has like a lot of, you know, he has infinite access to stuff. Mm-hmm. And I go, all right, there's a vibe here. I like that. And I think possibly it's the southernness which keeps him within some sort of maybe that's his constraint on some level.
Well, and he anchors himself to music.
Yes.
Before he anchors it, like the culture, he's anchoring himself to is music and, people over clothing and desires.
Yes.
I mean, and I love Will, and he'd be the first to say that, like, it's not about the clothes.
No, and that's where I'm saying, even when you talk about constraints, I think that's a very interesting idea. Because I think that I'm trying to think of anything I've ever liked that was like truly like maximalist. And I do like maximalism, but like, it's just where somebody has like so much and they were afforded everything they needed to continue to build.
I mean, prep in a way was kind of was built around constraints.
Yes.
That's
100. Yeah. By the way, that's it. When you look at any of it, and if they're fucking sewing this 6 days to air stuff, like,
yeah, exactly.
I really do love that. And I think that that's a huge part of, but certainly my foundation. And I think honestly, like the best kind of TV, right, is also supposed to be from that, because you're like, oh yeah, we're writing against a deadline. We need to go. Something that happened in television that's pretty interesting with like this binge model of TV is obviously there's often, depending on who you are, budget constraints, but basically you have to deliver everything, right? Mm-hmm. You deliver everything and then they color it, they do everything they need, but all at once, and then they have to air it for like the whole drop. The way TV used to be was that shit, you were working while the last one was airing. So there was this like, and I mean, this constant sense of like, like, we didn't have time to then just drop it all. And again, I know there's constraints always, but like literally you're writing to shoot, it shoots, you're writing to shoot, that you cannot miss that deadline. There's no making up for that.
Right.
And I think when you talk about prep, you talk about like any sort of, I like where this is going.
I mean, SNL
was also 100%. SNL is like the definition of it, and I think that, especially early on when you just feel like, you feel the constraints, you also feel the danger of it, you feel all of it. Yeah, I'm into this idea. I like this idea. I want to figure out how I can incorporate that more into my daily life.
I believe you kind of already do incorporate.
I know, but I like when I wake up in the morning, I want to be like, this constraint is good.
You have 24 hours to exist until the next day. How are you going to make the best of this? Exactly. You're like, shit.
No, totally. But no, I think that it is a time where I don't know if that's like the pervasive. I mean, obviously people are like, I don't get paid enough. I don't have enough money to make this thing that I want to make. And, I sympathize with a lot, but I also think that there's this other idea being like, well, then let's change the thing we're making. We got an opportunity. Let's do this.
Yeah.
I
love that you're deep in thought on this. That was very shooting from the hip because I was just like, oh man, this makes me think about this. What made Neo Yokio work?
I mean, I like that you say it worked. I would say it's when anyone asks me about the stuff I make, I would say that is probably closest to my personal sense of humor. It was not the most, it had a big cult following and I'm really proud of that. I think that what made that work is, that's a show that was created by Ezra Koenig and he came in I was making this Major Lazer cartoon. And we put him in the cartoon and he was like, oh, I'm a really big fan of Adult Swim and the stuff that, you were making there. And I have an idea and I really liked him. And we'd both gone to the same college and I had a lot of the same sort of, different years, but same reference points. And he was like, I want to make this like very weird show. And it was like partly live action and it was not an anime. But then I was like, why do you like that? Like, what is it that you like? And he started telling me the things he likes about anime and this sort of like, not how precious, that wouldn't have been the word he used, but like, the sort of almost, I guess, like fetishistic elements of anime and like, like there's, and I was like, oh, then why aren't we making, that's the thing you like, let's make an anime. And he's so clearly a very good storyteller and good with language that I think that what makes that successful to me is that it's very similar to my sense of humor on a level that I can really work with him. But I was able very quickly to see what is it that Ezra really can do and how can I bring out what I think are the funniest elements of what he can do. And I think you can feel the joy in it. Like we had the exact same, like I was able to see what he wanted to do, but I also had a similar kind of vision myself. Like we were very aligned as partners, I think, on it. And we both found the same things funny. And we both had the same reference points. But I think at the end of the day, it was, again, sort of I think it's his vision, and it was my ability to help him, sort of clarify it. Like, what is it that he's trying to do and get him there,
Right.
And it happened at a time where he was like in between albums and he could really spend the time working on it. And he really knew and cared about anime and,
Yeah, I mean, it's a great show. And now I think it's interesting because it's not, obviously it's over or not in production. I don't know, dark, whatever you want to say. And people are kind of discovering it that aren't just like people that are obsessed with Vampire Weekend or Ezra.
No.
They're like, yo, this was a pretty amazing show. Like, it's a great show to revisit. It holds up for sure.
I will say, I think it was people say this shit when something's not successful, but I do believe the show was ahead of its time because there were like conversations. People did not know, and it's something I do like about a lot of the work I make. But in this case, because the anime audience is so, I mean, I don't know what would be the nicest. Just the anime is passionate, and specific. That I think that when we did this, and I really do believe it was not a problem that it was on Netflix, but if it had been on Adult Swim, you would have known it was a comedy. But it was so dry that I think people absolutely could not understand. Am I watching? Like, literally, the comments are like, "Is this funny?" We're like, "How could you not think it's funny? How you don't have to think it's funny, but how could you not understand that it's definitely not serious? These are definitely jokes, whether or not you like them. You think that this character is this stilted and we didn't understand that. He's saying they're having conversations about Toblerones and you don't think we think that that's funny, so I would say that like definitely like that. And I think it's very strong anti-capitalist stuff is like, so like it's obsession with clothing. It's obsession with, I don't think people were quite doing that like in the way where to me, it would probably play better right now. People would absolutely understand some character constantly talking about brand names.
Well, I think like, a lot of people have gotten into it just from memes.
Yes, no, it was definitely like heavily like a big meme show, which we didn't even plan on because memes weren't really a thing.
Yeah,
it was like,
definitely.
But we wrote it with like that intention of like every line. Look, my favorite movie is American Psycho, and I think that to me. And Ezra liked it, but he wasn't like obsessed the way I was. I was like, I do want this show to be American Psycho. Every line needs to be totally clear and stilted and funny. Like every line alone, like, and I do remember it's like you could take every single line of American Psycho and out of context is very unique and specific. Every single line. There isn't a line that in the whole movie that doesn't feel like a meme already. It's so it's fetishized. Every line is so fetishized. There's no shot where someone just is like, okay, see you later. Not once. It has to be, I have to go return some videotapes. Like every single line, there's nothing casual about it. And to me, that is, if I'm not saying what is successful about Neo Yokio or why, but I think that it was like all of that coming together. And I do feel like that's what allowed for like the memification of it was that there's no casual see you later. I was like, I did push. I was like, every single line that, you write or in the movie that we write has to be overtly specific. No one can ever say goodbye or hello.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, it makes me want to rewatch the entire thing now. I mean, it's because it definitely holds up, especially all the clothes stuff. I mean, in a lot of ways, I don't know. I'm not saying like that's, because a lot of people like it's a show almost like I Think You Should Leave early on to where people like, I don't really get this, but then all my cool friends really get it. So I guess I'm going to get it, and and then you end up getting into it like maybe fake at first, but
well, by the way, but by the way, it's so funny that you describe it that way. Cause just like Adult Swim, I think it definitely had like its own language and rhythm and tone that I think is not meant to be off-putting. It is just, it requires a certain amount of, if not work, just like it is a little bit of time. And I think You Should Leave is very similar. It's like you have to sort of, it's not necessarily an acquired taste, but you have to open yourself up to the kind of rhythm and joke telling and the yelling and the pace. Eric Andre, very similar. Like you have to open yourself up to it. And in its own way, in its sort of slower way, I think Neo Yokio needs it. I mean, I think of this one line Ezra wrote all the time, which is when, you know, the character falls in love with the big pop star Sailor Pellegrino, and he tells his robot, because he doesn't know any of her music, even though she's so popular, and he just says, "What, like, play me a song." And he's like, "What do you want to hear?" And he's just, "Play me the most popular one." And so he plays it, and then later he says to someone, he's like, "Do you really like her?" And he goes, "Are you a fan of her music?" He says, "No, I'm a fan of her success." And there's something about that, I'm just being a fan of, which I figured is very real, but there's like little things like, I'm a fan of her success. Like, I don't like what she does, but I love that she's successful. I don't know. There's something it's so perverse. That show, it is the closest. Like, I could watch that shit even though I was involved in it. I could watch it all the time.
I mean, this is a fantastic conversation. But Nick, thank you so much for your time. It was great hanging, man.
Oh, man, I loved it. I mean, we just spent my whole evening together.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. All right. I'll see you, man.
All right. Peace.
Okay, that's it. You've been listening to Blammo. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for tuning in. If you like the show, do what you do when you like stuff. Leave reviews, tell friends, whatever that is. Just, spread the vibes. Our show is produced by Blammo Media. We're edited by Amar Lul, and our music by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. If you want to get deeper into the Blammoverse, join us on Patreon, where we have exclusive shows, bonus episodes, and the world's award-winning #1 greatest Slack community. Thanks again for listening. My name is Jeremy Kirkland. See you soon.